Okay, welcome back. Here we are to the second page of our lesson plan template. And so we are going to begin with the academic language demands. And so this whole section is about developing your students' language, spoken, written, vocabulary, and so we really want to be very intentional about what we put in here. It says consult your EdTPA handbook for this, and you don't have an EdTPA handbook because the EdTPA, which is it's a big assessment that you take during your student teaching, is currently on pause with the state. And so people that have been graduating over the last couple of years have not had to do the EdTPA. Hopefully you won't either, but if you do, know that you'll be well prepared. All of the ESAs that you do in your courses really help to prepare you well for the EdTPA. So anyway, since you don't have a handbook, I'm going to tell you what language function means. Language function simply means the action that the students are taking. So let's type that in here, right? The action the students are taking. So in our former example of adding and subtracting two-digit numbers, adding and subtracting would be it's kind of like an umbrella term, right? So you don't have to get really specific. You could put what the language function is, what is the action that the students are taking. Reading fluently, that might be another language function. So whatever it is that the students are doing, whatever action they're doing in your lesson, that's the language function. Oh, and I forgot to mention up here, you don't necessarily have to write something in this cell here, but if you wanted to, you could talk about whether the students during this lesson are going to be reading, writing, listening, and or speaking. And so that's all that's for right there, but you could also just leave it blank. The next one is vocabulary, self-explanatory, right? Just put the vocabulary that you're teaching them or they need to know to be successful in this lesson. Next is math. And math procedure, so if this is only appropriate if you're doing a math lesson. So if you are doing a math lesson, which I love because I teach math methods, if you're doing a math lesson, then you want to state here whether you are building conceptual understanding. So is this like the first lesson in this new area? Like it's the beginning of a unit on fractions. Your students have never done fractions before. They're in third grade. They've never worked with fractions before. So you're introducing the concept and you're using concrete objects and other examples for them to develop the idea of what a fraction is. If it's that you're doing, then conceptual understanding is what you're building in this lesson. Sometimes though they have it and you're just building fluency. Are you just giving them opportunity to develop procedural fluency? As in reading, students don't just learn how to read, right? We have to give them opportunities to read often so that they can build their fluency. Same with math. So if students you've already taught them what a fraction is and how to add fractions with like denominators, then you might give them, a couple of days to do practice with adding fractions with like denominators. And so, so that's what procedural fluency is. And then the last kind of math instruction that you might be doing is mathematical reasoning. And mathematical reasoning is when you're applying a math concept. So if you have the students maybe working on word problems of real world situations, that is mathematical reasoning, having to solve problems where they have to apply a process. And so these are the three different kinds of mathematical procedures there are, three broad categories. And so if you're doing a math lesson, talk about which one or two that you're working on. Okay, discourse is the next section, and that has to do with how are the students using the language. So how are you expecting them to use those vocabulary terms? Are they going to be, are you doing pair and share? Are you having whole class discussions? Are you doing small group work? List the times and the areas that students are going to be using the language. Syntax, like it says here, is just the symbols, words, or phrases that students will be using. So if you're doing a math lesson, the symbols are the addition signs, the subtraction signs. If you're doing a reading lesson, then it's more about words and phrases that you put together, right? And you might have sentence starters that you use for them. So here it's mostly about symbols, words, and structures. The last part is how are you going to support their language development? Are you going to, maybe during your lesson, you're going to be creating an anchor chart with a new vocabulary, or an anchor chart that shows them that models how to do a problem. Then you would, so you could talk about that, right? So I'm going to provide anchor charts that students can refer to when they're doing their work. Are you going to pull some students that may be English language learners in your class and work with them in a small group to kind of scaffold their learning a little bit, maybe with pictures or other ways in which to help them learn the language? This might be another thing that you write about here. I intend to also pull small groups of students that are struggling and work to make sure that they understand the vocabulary and the other requirements. So these are some ways in which you might support students' language use. The next section is assessment. And assessment it happens informally and formally, right? We take data, hard data, so that we know where each one of our students is in terms of the lesson objective. So if the lesson objective, remember, was students will add and subtract two-digit numbers using the standard algorithm. For my formal evaluation, I would give an exit ticket where students did a couple of problems. Maybe they did 2 addition and 2 subtraction problems, and that would help me know where each one of my students was. A formal evaluation could also be if you're working in small groups and you've got stations. It could be when you pull those small groups, you have each person ask you to, kind of like a math interview, tell you how to solve a problem. Can you walk me through how you solve this problem? And so those are then you get a sense of where each one of your students is. That's formal evaluations. Okay. Informal evaluations are where you're kind of taking the temperature of the room. Like, say you just modeled how to do something. Maybe it's to write a letter, write the parts of a letter, or maybe it's to solve a math problem. Whatever it is, then you might do one together with the class. And then you might turn to the class and say, okay, who's ready to move on? Or who would like me to do another problem? If you'd like me to do another problem before you go on and do some of these yourself, give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And that tells you where people are, right? So do observations. While students are working either in groups or pairs or on their own, you could be walking around doing observations of the students, looking at the work they're doing, asking them questions. So doing things like thumbs up, thumbs down, observing your students while they're working, these are really good ways to informally assess your students. It doesn't give you an idea of where each student necessarily is towards the lesson objective, but it gives you a sense of where the class is. Okay, we are going to stop here, and I'm going to do the rest of the lesson plan on the last video for this tour. So stay tuned.